Ya, pasca keputusan Brexit dari hasil referendum tanggal 23 Juni lalu, Inggris disebut-sebut tengah berada pada masa ketidakpastian. Terpilihnya Perdana Menteri Inggris yang baru, yaitu Theresa May, kian memberi desakan lebih kuat dari negara-negara di Eropa agar Inggris segera menyelesaikan negosiasinya untuk melakukan Brexit. Nah, apa saja tantangan Inggris ke depan dalam memposisikan dirinya di Uni Eropa dan sejauh mana Brexit membawa keuntungan bagi Inggris? Kita akan bahas dalam Insight kali ini bersama saya, Desi Anwar.
Pasca referendum Inggris yang menghasilkan keputusan Inggris keluar dari Uni Eropa, Inggris mengalami ketidakstabilan finansial dan gejolak pasar. Mata uang Inggris, pound sterling, jatuh hingga sempat menyentuh angka 1,28 dolar Amerika Serikat. Nilai pound sterling diperkirakan masih akan jatuh hingga di bawah angka 1,2 dolar Amerika yang sama dengan nilai pound sterling pada Mei 1985. Selain itu, keluarnya Inggris dari Uni Eropa menimbulkan gejolak politik yang dimulai dengan mundurnya Perdana Menteri David Cameron pada Juni lalu. Perebutan kursi Perdana Menteri pun terjadi di Partai Konservatif antara Theresa May dan mantan wali kota London, Boris Johnson. May akhirnya terpilih sebagai Perdana Menteri Inggris, sedangkan Boris Johnson diangkat menjadi Menteri Luar Negeri. Perdana Menteri Theresa May menyerukan agar rakyat Inggris bersatu di bawah kepemimpinannya setelah Inggris keluar dari Uni Eropa. Dia berjanji akan mewujudkan visi yang menguntungkan bagi setiap warga. Inggris kini memasuki masa transisi selama 2 tahun untuk melakukan negosiasi dengan negara anggota Uni Eropa lain. Negosiasi baru dapat dilakukan setelah Inggris memulai proses keluarnya dari Uni Eropa secara resmi. Grafiadi Kresnantio, CNN Indonesia.
Ya, pemirsa, ada sejumlah perubahan dan keputusan baru terkait dampak hasil referendum di Inggris. Seperti apa masyarakat Inggris kini menjelang hengkangnya Inggris dari Uni Eropa. Nah, kita akan berbincang dengan Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia yang telah hadir bersama saya di studio, Muazzam Malik. Hello, Ambassador Malik. It's good to have you with us.
It's great to be here. Good evening to you all.
The show. And apa kabar?
Kabar
Bagaimana
baik,
bahasa Indonesianya? Sudah bagus?
Bahasa Indonesia saya lumayan. Berminat. Selalu siap untuk coba, tapi masih ada banyak kesalahan.
Kalau kita wawancara bahasa Indonesia bagaimana?
Siap. Tapi minta maaf sebelumnya kalau ada kesalahan. Tapi selalu siap.
Okay, let's do it in both languages.
Okay.
Okay, this is just over a month now after that historic referendum that left the whole of the UK completely shell-shocked. I mean, we've seen, the pound dropping to its historic low. We've seen, buyer's remorse after people said, no, I wanted to actually the country to remain within Europe. We didn't know that we're going to leave, and the demands for the second referendum to be taken. And also we've seen a lot of political shake-up. Now, how is the mood in the UK over a month after?
So a month after the referendum, 2 weeks after the formation of a new government, things are calming down. We're getting back to business. We are back at business. There's a new government. They're at their desks. They're working. So yeah, it's true. The referendum result caught many people by surprise.
Did it surprise you?
It surprised me, frankly. Yes, it surprised me. Just over half of our country voted that they wanted to exit the European Union. It's a very big decision because for more than 40 years the UK has been part of the European Union. So for a lot of people, this is just who we are, what we've grown up with. It's been part of our personal lives, it's been part of our professional lives. I'm used to working with the European Union. So yeah, when it comes along, it was a surprise. We're used to getting on a train, getting out of Brussels and Paris, or having Brits living all over Europe and so on. So we're very used to that, the guy I head up Eropa dalam kawasannya. So, we're very used to that. So it did come as a surprise.
Tapi sekarang sudah mulai lebih stabil ya, and it's now more stabilized more.
Sure.
But the economic impact, is it actually felt already? I know we know that the UK has not been doing well economically in the last few years, but has it worsened considerably because of the Brexit referendum results?
So actually, first and foremost, on the contrary, the UK has been doing really well over the last few years economically, certainly compared to the rest of Europe and most other developed countries.
I stand corrected, but although they say that wage has not risen.
No, our real wages are going up now. We went through a recession, like a lot of countries after the financial crisis, but the UK economy has been growing at 2 to 3% consistently. We've cut our budget deficit. We've got record low unemployment right now. We've got low inflation. Our interest rates are at 0.5%, and the pound has been very stable. So actually, the UK has been one of the strongest economies in the developed world over the last 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years.
Well, that probably hasn't translated into the Leave campaigners
quite
painting the UK as.
But the Brexit vote is clearly an economic shock. This isn't what we expected, and so as you say, the exchange rate has depreciated on that news. But actually, our stock market has held up. The exchange rate went down, has found a new level, and it's actually relatively stable. And the truth of it is that the UK is the world's 5th largest economy, the 2nd largest economy in Europe. And whilst this vote has created quite a lot of uncertainty about our future relationship with the European Union and indeed with the rest of the world, and we're going to need some time to work out what that new relationship looks like. So there is uncertainty. We can't pretend otherwise.
And it is to be impact. There will be some economic.
There will be some economic impact. Some economic impact will undoubtedly arise. But we've got to remember this is a very large economy, a very competitive economy. Our competitiveness derives from our stable regulation, our law, the capabilities of our young people, the quality of our universities, our vocational training. All of that doesn't change. So yes, there's some uncertainty, but actually the economy is holding up, and there will be some costs arising out of this, but there will be opportunities too, right? UK exports just got 10% cheaper. For Indonesians who want to go on holiday to the UK, it just got 10% cheaper. Right?
Were you surprised about the political fallout? I mean, we've seen the Labour Party now in disarray, and then the debacle with the Boris Johnson, and the drama and the scandal that goes with it. And for most of us here, I mean, we used to seeing Boris Johnson, who is now the Foreign Secretary, but there's the figure, Theresa May is now the new Prime Minister. Tell us a little bit about what can we expect from this new government and the kind of mandate that is given to the Tory party under her leadership.
Sure. So we have a parliamentary system of government, right? We don't have a direct election for our Prime Minister. So when David Cameron lost the referendum, he decided that
mea culpa, he has to.
He decided that he didn't have the authority to lead the government through this next phase of Brexit and reforming our relationships in Europe and internationally. So he resigned. The Conservative Party, who have a parliamentary majority, chose a new leader. The new leader becomes Prime Minister. So we have a new Prime Minister. Actually, it happened very, very quickly, more quickly than any of us thought possible.
We were waiting for October. I mean, he mentioned
we were waiting for an election result in September, in an internal Tory party election result, and taking office in October. But actually, it happened very quickly. That tells you something about the nature of politics in the UK. People realised that this was a big decision. It was a moment of crisis, and in fact, things moved very quickly to try and give a sense of calmness, of authority, a sense of a new phase. Now, Theresa May, as the Prime Minister, is a very experienced politician. She's been a cabinet minister for many years. In many countries, my country included, the Home Ministry is usually a graveyard slot. But actually, she's been one of the longest serving and one of the most successful Home Secretaries. So she's used to dealing with a tough brief. It's a brief where she's had to negotiate a lot with European and other partners, given the challenges of issues around counterterrorism, migration, and so on. So she's used to working internationally.
Okay. And the last female Prime Minister that the UK had, Margaret Thatcher, was
and she's our second, and she's our second female Prime Minister. Now, she's formed a new government. Actually, there have been some very important changes in the machinery of government too. So we've created a Ministry for International Trade. Previously, that didn't exist because trade was delegated to Europe.
Obviously,
we've created a new department for exiting the European Union. which will handle the negotiations when they begin with the European Union. So, we're going through a process of making sure that we are capable, that we've thought through the policy, that we're clear about what our objectives are before we dive into this negotiation. And it's very important to take that moment to reflect, actually.
Okay, let's take a quick break,
Okay.
Ambassador Malik, but we will continue, especially, will Brexit actually happen or not, and what are the steps and what are being prepared to actually ensure that the UK remains a solid country even after Brexit. Kita akan lanjutkan perbincangan bersama Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia untuk membahas lebih jauh lagi mengenai tantangan serta masa depan Inggris terkait dengan Brexit. Tetaplah bersama Insight. Masih bersama Insight. Di tengah ketegasannya untuk meneruskan hasil referendum untuk mengeluarkan Inggris dari Uni Eropa, Perdana Menteri Inggris yang baru, Theresa May, gencar berusaha mempertahankan hubungan ekonomi Inggris dengan negara-negara di Eropa. Kita lihat setelah dilantik menjadi Perdana Menteri Inggris yang baru, Theresa May melakukan kunjungan ke Jerman dan Perancis. May menjelaskan keinginannya membangun kerjasama yang erat dengan Jerman sebelum dilakukan negosiasi formal, dan juga memastikan kejayaan Inggris setelah keluar dari Uni Eropa. Sementara di pihaknya, Kanselir Jerman Angela Merkel menyatakan negosiasi formal akan dilakukan antara Uni Eropa dan Inggris sesuai dengan pasal 50 Perjanjian Uni Eropa. Merkel juga memaklumi jika Inggris membutuhkan waktu untuk menentukan kerjasama di bidang yang diperlukan dengan Uni Eropa. Ya, kita memiliki waktu setelah Brexit, misalnya transisi 2 tahun, di mana Inggris didesak sejumlah negara untuk segera berkomitmen pada keputusannya untuk keluar dari Uni Eropa dan memulai negosiasi secepatnya. Dan ini biasanya setelah melakukan yang namanya disebut artikel 50 atau pasal 50 kalau misalnya negara itu keluar dari Uni Eropa. Saya masih ditemani oleh Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia, Masa Malik, yang akan menceritakan sedikit mengenai bagaimana kira-kira proses perjalanan untuk akhirnya memang betul-betul keluar dari Brexit. Karena sekarang ya sudah ada referendum, tapi secara praktek semuanya masih berlangsung dengan seperti biasa, karena masih belum ada langkah-langkah konkret baik secara politik maupun secara administratif, birokrasi dan lain sebagainya mengenai Inggris keluar dari Uni Eropa. Now, an interesting thing, now you have the new Prime Minister at the helm, but you also have a new Foreign Secretary who is the face of Brexit, which is the former Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. Yes. Tell me, what do you feel about him? And obviously he's your new sort of,
my new boss.
Your new boss at the moment. And will this is this Brexit now carved in stone? Is there no turning back from this decision?
Sure. So look, the Prime Minister has been very clear. Brexit means Brexit. So the UK people, the British people have taken a decision. They voted in this referendum to leave the European Union. That's clear. There's no debate on that, actually. That's done. But we now have a process to work out what does that actually mean. What are the terms of our future relationship with the European Union? The Prime Minister has been very clear. We're not going to rush into that. So she has consulted Angela Merkel, President Hollande, other partners in Europe.
Who until now said, okay, you invoke the Article 50 and then we talk about...
Absolutely. And actually we need to do some homework within Whitehall to work out what are the range of options. People talk about different models. The Turkey model, the Norway model, the Switzerland model, and there are other models too. Maybe there will be a uniquely UK model. We don't know yet. But of course, we also need to consult within our country because the UK is a constituent part with different countries.
Yeah,
so
you
the
have
Prime
Scotland, you have Wales, and you have Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. So we need to consult within the country with the governments of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to make sure that they're on board and we're clear about their interests. And then, maybe in 3 months' time or so, the Prime Minister has signalled, we will move forward. So at some point in the coming months, this Article 50, the famous Article 50, will be invoked.
But nobody knows anything or how to implement it.
It's the first time it's happening, and we have a guideline that it will take 2 years to negotiate. But actually, I think it's very hard to predict where we will end up. Okay, so, it'll take 2 years. Actually, it could take less, it could take longer. We have a number of models that people talk about. We may end up with one of those models, or we may end up with a uniquely British model. We don't know.
But do you have a sense of that, there is some kind of clear roadmap at this stage, or not yet, or nowhere near? And when we talk about, okay, Brexit means Brexit, but we will take our time, or we will make sure that we are going the right direction. Are we talking about, 3 months, or a year, or 2 years, or maybe even 4 or 5 years ahead before this whole thing is being invoked, this Article 50?
So, the Prime Minister so far has indicated that we will invoke the Article 50 soon after 3 months into her administration. We're 2 weeks in, so it's still very early days. We need to take the time to do the homework. So that's clear. It's also clear that once you've invoked Article 50, there's a 2-year negotiating window. Yeah, so that's clear. So we have a timetable. In terms of roadmap, actually we need to do the homework, but we have some very clear principles. We know that Europe is still going to be a very strong economic partner for us. A lot of our exports go to Europe. A lot of German exports, other exports from around the European Union come to the UK. Actually, it's going to be in the interests of both sides to try and ensure that we have strong access to each other's markets. We know too that in terms of services, we have lots of partnerships in terms of universities and research. We have lots of partnerships. And actually, it's in the interests of both sides to try and protect those. So there's a very clear principle. As my new boss, Boris Johnson, has said, we may exit the European Union, but we are not exiting Europe. That's a fact of history, geography, culture. We are Europeans.
Just on the personal level, tell me, because he's now your new boss, Boris Johnson, do you think there's a suitable, face of, to represent the UK to the rest of the world? And does he have some new guidelines for you and new sort of breakthroughs that you have to?
Well, it's early days. He's been in office 2 weeks, but he's very clear that Britain is a global country. So his tagline is not just Great Britain, but global Britain. So his steer to us is, how do we show that this vote doesn't mean that we are retreating? Actually, Britain is still a power in the world, an economic power, a big influencer. Our universities are brilliant, our creative industries are brilliant. We're still a member of the UN Permanent Five, we're G20, G7. We're the only country in the world which commits 2% of our GNI to defence and 0.7 of our GNI to development spending, the only country in the G8 that does that. So we're a very special country. We're a global player, and we're going to continue to be a global player. I think it's also really important to remember that Boris Johnson was a very successful mayor of London. Okay, so
certainly very popular when he was mayor of London.
He was hugely popular in London. He was hugely popular internationally. He was an ambassador for London. He went round the world. The doors opened. People wanted to live in London, do business with London, trade with London, work in London, send their kids to study in London. So he was a great ambassador for our capital. I see no reason why he can't be a great ambassador for our country. He's certainly well known around the world.
Well, you're a diplomat, you have to say that, don't you? Ambassador Malik, I mean, we've seen the reaction of Germany, France, and all of the countries in Europe. Obviously not happy that the UK has decided to have this referendum to begin with, as not to mention the result of actually leaving this holy union, so to speak. But when we talk about, the kind of models, the Turkish model, the Norwegian model, and so on, but the first thing is they're not going to be that generous when it comes to giving extra concessions for the UK when it comes to putting forward the terms of the negotiations. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Because obviously the last thing they want to do is actually encourage other member states to start packing their bags and declaring that, whether it's Brexit or Netherlands exit and so on and so forth.
So I think there are two different issues here, Desi, if I may. One is political and one is economic. Okay. In terms of the economic interests, actually the economic interests of the two sides, the European Union and the UK, are very clear. The UK is the second largest economy in Europe. A Europe without the UK is much diminished, and therefore trying to maintain strong economic ties is in the interests of both the UK and Europe, and we're going to need to find terms to try and achieve that closeness in our cooperation. The political issue that guides that is tricky because, we're talking so far about this being a political challenge for the UK, but of course this is a huge challenge for Europe too, because whilst the UK has voted, has had a referendum, made a decision, actually there are groups within other European countries that are similarly asking for a renegotiation or a reformulation of what Europe means. In Denmark, in Netherlands, in France, in Italy.
Yes.
And so actually there's a political challenge here for Europe too. What is the future of Europe?
What is the future of Europe? And I think it's good to end this segment on this, because this is something that we need to explore. What is the future of Europe? What is the future of the UK? And what is the future of the whole world now with this is happening. Dan kita sekarang akan lanjutkan setelah informasi berikut ini perbincangan bersama Masa Malik, Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia. Kita masih berbicara mengenai dampak terhadap Uni Eropa dan juga Inggris setelah referendum Brexit. Kembali dalam Insight, bagaimana Inggris menangani sejumlah kebijakan bersama negara-negara Uni Eropa bila Inggris resmi keluar. Kita lanjutkan perbincangan bersama Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia, Masa Malik. And Ambassador Malik, there's one I think great thing about Great Britain, it's the multiculturalism. And we have you as an ambassador representing the UK and as Muslim, and it's very much multiculturalism is very much embedded in the DNA of the United Kingdom. Now, on the other hand, the vote to leave the European Union has also been a sort of a vote against the difference, immigration, against people coming to the UK, whether it's taking jobs and also with the problems of the Syrian refugees and the people, the migrant workers from North Africa and the Middle East. Now, how do you see, and like you rightly said, this is also repeated in France, for example, in the Netherlands and in Germany herself, where we see more and more right-wing groups clamoring for some kind of border control and for basically to keep immigration out. How do you see this as a future of Europe and the UK?
Well, I think for the UK, we're a very diverse country, as you said. We're actually a very tolerant and law-abiding country too. 25% of the population of London actually is not white-skinned. Okay, 10% of our population is from an ethnic origin that is not British. 5% of our population today is Muslim. So actually we're a very diverse country indeed. That's a fact. That's not going to change. You can't, that's just part of who we are as modern Britain. It means that you have people in government who are brown, black, from all over the world, family origins from all over the world. It means that you have people in the media, in government, in diplomacy, and so on, increasingly reflecting the diversity of modern Britain. It's also true to say, I think, in all countries, Indonesia included, that minorities always have to struggle for their rights. So whilst in the UK, actually we have a multicultural society, very successful in many ways compared to most other countries, minorities have had to struggle for their rights and will continue to struggle for their rights. That's just part of the nature of political discourse, I think, in every country around the world. But I don't, so in the wake of this referendum result, we've had a spike of some hate crimes. We've had a sharpened, polarized debate in our country.
Is that still going on now, the spike of hate crimes?
The numbers have come back down. The government has been very clear. This is not who we are. This is not what Britain's about. We are a tolerant, diverse nation that values our diversity and wants to celebrate its diversity. The police are very clear. They're being very vigilant. Our ministers are taking a special interest in this. So I'm pleased to say that that spike has already come down, and I expect that over the coming months it'll remain low and we'll get back to a more normal kind of political discourse. But it's also important to say that maybe this decision is so big that this is a moment where we will have big political debate in the UK. This is a moment maybe of reformasi for the UK.
And a bit of soul searching as well.
Absolutely. So this is a moment where actually we need to think about what are the values, that we stand for, what is the future of our country, what is the future relationship we want with Europe and with the rest of the world. We have great capability, we're a big economy, We have fantastic universities, great industries, great culture, great music, great football, but we nevertheless need to take a moment after a very, very stable and successful period to say, well, what's the next phase of our national journey? But I think this is where, at the end of the last segment, we talked about Europe too. This is a challenge not just for the UK, but for Europe. So the European project has been enormously successful in delivering prosperity and stability in the region. But we are very clear in the UK and indeed in other countries that there are many who are not entirely comfortable with the European project.
And they're actually winning seats in
And
the
they're winning
parliament,
seats in the
which is,
European Parliament, they're winning seats in national parliaments. So just as we have a moment of reformasi in the UK where we need to rethink our future, I think actually this vote should give pause for thought to Europe's leaders too, to work out politically what is the future of Europe. And I think out of that reflection and that kind of debate will come new opportunities, not just for the UK's relationship with Europe, but actually the future of the European Union itself, and indeed the future role that this incredibly diverse and dynamic region will play in the world over the 21st century.
Yeah, certainly interesting times ahead of us. But when you say Brexit means Brexit, what does it mean when it comes to immigration and some kind of, taking our country back, this idea of border control? What does it mean? Because there are lots of migrant workers from whether it's Poland or East Europe, as well as the refugees coming into the UK. Are we going to see people being kicked out because they're immigrants and they're not, they don't? And also, are we going to see how many millions of British people in the European Union, whether they're working or studying, being sort of kicked out and say you're no longer welcome here because you're not, you have a British passport?
No, so the government's been very, very clear. European workers who are already in the UK, they're making a huge contribution to the British economy, to British life. We're not looking to kick people out. We're going to need to work out how we regulate, in regulatory terms, ensure that they're able to stay and contribute in London and across our country. But there's a commitment from the government that we welcome the contribution that European nationals have been making to the UK. So there's a problem that we need to solve, we will solve it. But there is nobody showing anyone the exit door. The Mayor of London is very clear. London is the second largest French city in Europe.
Yes, but London voted Remain. I mean, unlike a lot of the rest of the countries.
But London is not looking for French nationals who are living and working there to leave. And we're going to need to work some of this out. Similarly, in terms of migration, actually, migration's been a big debate in the UK for 10 or 20 years now. And for a whole range of reasons, actually, we found it a great struggle to limit migration. And of course, over recent years, as part of the single market, we've had internal migration within the European Union. Now, the new government, Theresa May and her ministers, have been very clear. We are not going to rush to put artificial caps on migration in place. In fact, the UK, as an aging economy with an aging demographic, needs migrants to contribute to our economy, to ensure the dynamism of our society. We need to have a sensible debate about the level of migration that our country can cope with, our public services can cope with. And part of the motivation for Brexit is to give us the tools to be able to manage migration better. But there's
also an acknowledgement to the success of the UK. That's why you have a lot of people wanting to come and work and live in the UK.
So Brexit will mean that we have a more refined toolkit to manage migration, but there is no desire to begin to bear down on migration in ways which are actually self-defeating. They will damage us.
And also, I think this issue will sort of pan out well as long as there's a problem in the Middle East and Syria and the refugees that keeps flowing into Europe. It will, be Europe's and the UK's problem. And the other thing is, the United Kingdom. Obviously, we see the reaction. I mean, most of the Londoners, they vote for Remain, but then we see a great part of the countries, like for example, Wales and in the regions, they vote to leave. But on the other hand, you have the other part of the United Kingdom, Scotland and Northern Ireland. They're not very happy. They feel that they're being cheated out of this referendum. They want to stay in Europe. Now, this is clearly a danger to future unity of the country. And if England, it breaks up, let's hope not, touch wood, but England basically will just be a very, be quite difficult to play a big role in the world when it's just a little England.
Well, we're not Little England, we're Great Britain. And
For now, at least.
the Prime Minister has been very clear that before we invoke this Article 50, before we begin this process, we need to take a moment to consult the different parts of the United Kingdom. So she's been very quick to get up to Scotland and to consult the First Minister of Scotland. She's been across to Northern Ireland in the last few days. There's a consultation process underway with our friends and political colleagues in Wales and Cardiff too. And clearly this is a negotiation that once it begins will need to represent all parts of the country and to carry the country along. You know, we need to remember that it's not so long ago that we had a referendum on independence for Scotland.
Well, they're not talking about
for a country that doesn't do referenda, we've suddenly had two. But at the end of the day, the Scots voted to stay in the United Kingdom. There was a sharp debate. There was a difficult debate. But at the end of the day, the Scots voted to stay in the United Kingdom. Yes, we've now voted to exit the European Union. Yes, there is a need for us to re-examine. We have our moment of reformasi.
And there are talks of Scotland doing another referendum.
Well, there are talks, but I know that the Prime Minister is desperately committed to keeping the United Kingdom together, and indeed I believe the mood of the British people is to hold together as a country too. We're stronger together, and indeed that's what we will be trying to do.
And let's hope it remains a United Kingdom and a Great Britain and not a Little England. We take another little break. Ambassador Malik, but we will continue setelah informasi berikut ini. Kita akan membahas, kali ini fokus kita akan lebih ke hubungan bilateral antara Inggris dan Indonesia. Apakah akan ada perubahan yang berdasar akibat referendum Brexit ini? Sesaat lagi. Dalam 1 tahun terakhir, Indonesia dan Inggris telah menandatangani sejumlah kesepakatan kerjasama. Nah, lalu sejauh mana komitmen serta realisasi investasi Inggris ke Indonesia pasca keluarnya Inggris dari Uni Eropa? Kita lanjutkan perbincangan bersama Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia, Muazzam Malik. Now, before this whole referendum business, back in April, President Jokowi made a sort of quite an important visit to the UK, and we've seen sort of visits by the Prime Minister Cameron to this part of the world and to Indonesia, and agreements were signed, and there's this sort of desire for the UK to be sort of a gateway for Indonesia to enter the European Union. Now, Ambassador Malik, I mean, since you're here in Indonesia, how, with this Brexit thing, how is this being followed up, and what are the next steps, and do you have sort of a clear idea on what's going to happen to all these sort of bilateral agreements and agreements that have been signed? Like there's 7 agreements.
Yeah,
if I'm not
so
mistaken.
look, I don't think very much is going to change in terms of the bilateral relationship between the UK and Indonesia. Okay, so last year David Cameron visited Jakarta in July 2015, and this year, April 2016, the President visited London. Actually, we, in the 2 discussions and the whole range of other discussions that we've had a very rich dialogue between the 2 countries. When the President was in London, BKPM announced $19 billion worth of investment deals. Okay, if you consider that on the whole European tour, the total investment deals announced were $20.5 billion, you can see that the UK was a very big part of that, right? Now, all those companies that made a commitment to invest in Indonesia, none of them have changed their minds. Okay, I have no British companies coming to me saying we're out of here, we've changed our minds, we're off. No, actually they have been confirming that they're going to carry on being a partner to Indonesia. In fact, over and above that, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, BP have announced an $8 billion investment in Papua. It's an investment that's going to create 10,000 jobs. You know, we estimate that British companies in Indonesia create about 1 million jobs, are responsible for about 1 million jobs. So none of these British companies are telling me they're about to leave. British companies come to Indonesia because they're interested in making a long-term commitment based on Indonesia's potential, the size of its market, and its role in its region. That hasn't changed. Similarly, in terms of our trade relationship, actually trade in the 10 months or so for which we have data after Prime Minister Cameron's visit last July, went up by about 11%. Our exports to Indonesia went up 11%. Indonesia's exports to the UK went up 11%. I don't see any reason why that should change. Over time, maybe there are some price impacts. We'll have a look at that. But I don't think we're expecting any major impact. I met Kadin a few days ago. They don't expect any short-term impact. And in terms of our wider so in terms of the economic relationship, actually, we think there are opportunities. The UK has become a more attractive destination for investment because our assets are a bit cheaper. It's become a bit more attractive for buying goods and services because we've become a bit more cheaper. So actually, I think there are opportunities, and it's really, over the coming months from the UK side and indeed from the Indonesian side,
so it's good to hear
we're looking at how we can unlock those opportunities with trade missions, ministerial engagements, and so on. And in terms of the wider memorandum of understanding, we signed 7 in the last 12 months. Last July, when the Prime Minister was here, we signed MOUs on maritime cooperation, policing, space cooperation, and research and innovation.
And how are they? Where are they?
We're making good progress. We're making good progress. So, for example, on research and innovation, we've created partnerships between Indonesian universities and British universities. There are joint research projects underway. The policing MOU was actually inspired by Pak Tito. Pak Tito, in fact, has now become the chief of police, so he's still very wedded to this. He's interested in police reform. He's interested in the UK's model of community policing. We're looking at how we can send a contingent of Indonesian police to train in the UK. Pak Tito and I have been talking about this. So the policing cooperation on police reform, on CT cooperation, on countering violent extremism, where Indonesia has a really important role to play. Kerjasama terus, the same in the maritime area.
So everything's on track.
So we're on track.
So these are the things that you're focusing on at the moment. But what's happening in the UK, has it somehow changed your sort of position or your guidelines, or from up above, on how to approach Indonesia, or at the moment, it's just business as usual for?
So actually, it's
in
business as
Indonesia?
usual. Right, we press ahead with the trade and economic cooperation we had. We press ahead with the 7 MOUs that we've signed in the last 12 months. But actually, what's also very clear is that in future, the UK, whatever the terms of our relationship with Europe, is going to need to look further afield, more aggressively.
This is the point that I wanted, because part of the Leave campaign, as you said, that it's to free up the UK to actually do sort of more exciting and stuff with other countries other than Europe.
Right. So Europe will be a big part of our future, but actually Asia, particularly the big Asian countries like Indonesia, like India, like China, are going to be even more important to us. So we're going to be more aggressive, even more aggressive than we have been in the last 12 months in terms of trying to build and deepen our relationships with Indonesia. I think Indonesia as a G20 country has enormous potential for the future. It's the world's 16th largest economy. It's going to become a top 10 economy in the next 15 years. The UK is the world's 5th largest economy. Now, Indonesia's journey, actually achieving its potential, depends on good relationships with the outside world. And there's a great complementarity between the UK and Indonesia. So, we have a lot to gain. But actually, Indonesia needs work and collaboration and kerjasama with a country like the UK to achieve its potential too.
Now, education, you mentioned, is very important. And we send a lot of our students or young people and also researchers to the UK, and we do a lot of exchanges. But what other things that the UK is great for, especially if you're going to be no longer the gateway to Europe, there has to be much more attractive.
We haven't given up on being the gateway to Europe yet. Let's see where we end up.
But because we've seen some of these multinational companies they're either wait and see mode, or start thinking about changing the location of their headquarters from London to perhaps other parts of Europe. This will at some point.
But even in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen a number of multinationals actually re-announce their commitment to continue with their investment plans in the UK. So whilst there are some who are waiting and seeing, there are actually others who are saying, the UK's long-term competitiveness, in fact, depends on capable labour, regulation, infrastructure, and actually it's pretty good. But your question was, what else are we great at? Yes, we're great at education. We have some of the world's best universities, 4 of the world's best 10, 6 of the world's best 20, I think 20 of the world's best 100. But we also offer value for money, which is why Indonesians are going to the UK. But we're great in many other areas too. When the President visited London in April, one of the things that we celebrated was our capability in creative industries. And we signed one of those 7 MOUs in creative industries. The President was very clear. He sees the UK as a world leader in creative industries, and he wants a bit of that in Indonesia. We went to Fenwick, which is, as you know, on New Bond Street, London's premier retail street, to showcase 5 Indonesian designers who were displaying their products for the first time ever in New Bond Street, with all the shop windows taken up with Indonesia. Now, behind that actually was several years of work between the British Council and Jakarta Fashion Week to not just support Indonesian designers that are capable and talented, but actually to equip them with the business skills to break into the international market. Several years of work led to that shop front for Indonesia. And the President looked at this and said, I remember my days, these are his words, I remember my days going from Solo to Paris as a furniture salesman and what it meant for me and my country. And he looked at this and he said, I want more of this. So we can do this in fashion, we can do this in music, we can do this in film. And I'm talking to Beckcroft about how we really unlock that cooperation.
The creative industry is something that the government is very serious about.
But many other areas too. Asian Games. You have a huge challenge in delivering the Asian Games in 2 years' time. The UK delivered the world's best Olympic Games. We've delivered enormous sporting events, Rugby World Cups and Commonwealth Games. British companies have been successful all over the world. We're working in Rio. And so another one of those 7 MOUs that we signed was on sports cooperation. So we looked at how we can help Indonesia achieve a really successful Asian Games in 2 years' time.
You're very good at marketing your country, by the way. Very quickly, but in terms of investment, Indonesia in the UK and the UK in Indonesia, we're still talking about single-digit billion of dollars here. Is there any target that we should have, any targets of increasing in terms of the amount and the quantity of investment?
So BKPM announced $19 billion worth of deals in April. Okay, that's an enormous commitment.
Leap,
the UK is Indonesia's 5th largest investor. Actually, with those plans that BKPM announced and the BP investment that I just talked about, actually I'm very confident that UK is going to remain one of Indonesia's top investors over the coming years. Indonesia's investments in the UK actually are just at a very small amount right now. We've got a few investments, several $100 million, largely in property. I hope over time that as Indonesian companies in turn become multinationals, that actually they will look not just at property, but actually investment in factories, in retail, in business in the UK. That's something for the future.
Yes, and it's a homework for Indonesian government also to sort out how we can. Another quick break, but we will continue on the line of discussion. Kita akan lanjutkan perbincangan dan masih membahas hubungan antara Inggris dan Indonesia, terutama terkait dengan kebijakan-kebijakan di Indonesia. Tetaplah bersama Insight. Ya, Anda masih bersama Insight. Pemerintah Indonesia menyalakan perang terhadap penyalahgunaan narkotika. Di bawah Presiden Joko Widodo, pemerintah telah melaksanakan 3 tahap eksekusi terhadap terpidana mati kasus narkoba. Selain warga negara Indonesia, puluhan warga negara asing berada dalam daftar terpidana mati yang menunggu waktu eksekusi, termasuk seorang perempuan warga negara Inggris. Ya, kita lanjutkan kembali perbincangan bersama Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia, Muazzam Malik, and Ambassador Malik. Under the Jokowi's presidency, there have been a couple of executions, death penalties being implemented, and to great chagrins and criticisms and condemnation from various countries, including from the European countries and the UK. And very soon, I think there's going to be another wave. Very quickly, your thoughts about this. Of course, this is a concern.
Sure. Look, the UK's policy on this is very clear. We oppose the death penalty in all circumstances. We don't believe it works. We don't believe it's humane. we've made that clear to our friends here in Indonesia. Of course, this is a decision for Indonesia to make. This is a debate that Indonesia needs to have. But 160 countries around the world have decided to either put in place a moratorium or indeed abolished. The number of countries that are using the death penalty is shrinking year on year. I think Indonesia needs to choose. Does it want to be alongside China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or does it want to sit alongside the 160 countries that have decided that this doesn't work? And actually, it's really important to remember that there is no international evidence that the death penalty works. There is no deterrence. There is no deterrence. Let's be clear about this. For example, in the case of homicide, in Canada, in the 27 years after they abolished the death penalty, the homicide rate went down 44%. In the US, where they of course still use the death penalty, the homicide rate didn't go down. In Iran, where they are very active in using the death penalty, the drugs prevalence rate, the use of drugs, is very, very high. In Sweden, where there is no death penalty, drug use is very low. So actually there's no evidence that death penalty leads to a reduction in either homicide or indeed in drugs. So our advice to our friends in Indonesia is have an evidence-based debate. Look at the evidence, weigh it up, work out, does this work or doesn't this work? And then decide, do you want to be part of the 160 who have given up on this? Or do you want to stand alongside those that continue?
And what sort of feedback do you get from the government on these issues? Because obviously, you know, there's been no lacking of input, criticism, and so on. I mean, do you find that it's just falling on deaf ears, or do you see that there is some kind of, you know, whether it's political reasoning behind it? I mean,
I think there's a debate in the Indonesian government about this. Of course, the policy is the policy, but there is a debate, I think, in the Indonesian government. There are some very important voices that have come out against the death penalty. A few weeks ago, former President Habibie, the father of the nation, gave a very, very strong statement. He said that he believed that only God had the right to take life. We've had prominent people like Jimli Siddiqui, the ex-Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, say that actually he doesn't believe the death penalty is appropriate in the 21st century. We've got some of Indonesia's top lawyers, people like Todang Mulia Lubis, saying actually this is not right, this is not the kind of country we want to be. So I think there are some very prominent voices outside government, and indeed I believe some voices in government that are debating this issue. And I think really what's needed here is an evidence-based debate. Does it work? This is also an issue, Desi, where it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, politicians have to lead and the public follows.
But you'd be surprised that a lot of the people, Indonesians, actually support the death penalty. That's one thing that's quite salient in this.
But look at the story of my country. Okay, we made our first move. Our last execution was in 1965. Okay, but we didn't abolish the use of the death penalty until 1998. Even in the 2000s, if you took a poll, you would have found a small majority in favor of the death penalty. It was only in 2014. It was only in 2014 that we had a majority against the death penalty. But actually, politicians had to lead. Sometimes that's what's required to make change. So yes, there may well be a strong public opinion, but I think Indonesia's policymakers need to decide what does Indonesia stand for? What are the values it stands for?
Okay, and on two other things very quickly. Now we're coming to the end of our program. Now Indonesia, now we've had 1 year of Jokowi leadership, and just quickly, your experience on doing business or being in Indonesia. And the other thing is the foreign policy is very clear under the Jokowi presidency, very different to under President SBY. It's more sort of like, you know, friends with benefits. You know, we will create economic agreements, trade partnership, and so on and so forth. There's clear benefits for Indonesia economically. You know, what do you think of the Jokowi's performance up to this date? And also, we've had a recent reshuffling of the cabinet, which, you know, just quick thoughts on this.
So we're, you know, this is a president that's in charge at the national level for the first time. Okay. Now, whenever any of us take on a new job, there's some time needed to do a bit of learning. That's true for me as ambassador. No doubt it was true for you as a TV anchor too. I think the president's doing a pretty good job. I think, you know, my prediction was that year 2 would be better than year 1, year 3 would be better than year 2, and then we would see how things were close to the election. I think actually the government's doing pretty well. The rupiah is pretty stable. The economy is continuing to grow. I think the reform packages, the 12 packages that the president has put out, have some very good measures. There are issues around implementation, but some very, very good measures there. The infrastructure plans are moving forward. So I think Indonesia is not quite at the moment where it's taking off, but it's making solid progress. And I hope that the new team that's been put in place, including the new finance minister, can really work with the president's reform instincts, because I believe he's a reformer actually, to unlock Indonesia's potential. And in terms of foreign policy, all of us actually take an interest-based approach to foreign policy. There's no sense in having friendship for friendship's sake. We look for complementarity and fit. And as I said earlier, I think the fit and the complementarity between Indonesia and the UK is very, very strong. And our approach to foreign policy is not that different to President Jokowi. But I would say one thing, which I think is really important in this, which is that the lessons of the last 20 or 30 years show that actually international problems require international solutions. None of us can operate in isolation. None of us can solve international problems sitting at home. And countries that are big, countries in the G20, countries that are going to shape the 21st century, like Indonesia, have a responsibility to emerge on the international stage. So the UK is used to playing that kind of role because of our history and our background. And I hope that Indonesia will emerge as an increasingly active partner, yes, whether it's to address extremism or bird flu or climate change or whatever, because these are collective problems which, if we don't work together to solve them, will bite us at home.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Very good ending then. Of course, Indonesia, we're now part of the ASEAN Economic Community. So although we're still waiting the results of the US election and see which way the whole world is heading with a new presidency. Thank you very much, Ambassador Malik, for your insights. And keputusan referendum Inggris memang menimbulkan sejumlah konsekuensi baik bagi Inggris, Uni Eropa maupun secara global. Nah, terpilihnya Theresa May sebagai Perdana Menteri Inggris menggantikan David Cameron diharapkan bisa membawa Inggris melewati masa transisi dengan baik hingga resmi keluar dari Uni Eropa. Selain konsekuensi keluarnya Inggris dari Uni Eropa juga membuka peluang-peluang baru bagi Inggris, termasuk tentu saja meningkatkan kerjasama dengan Indonesia di berbagai bidang. Hubungan kedua negara ini diharapkan dapat semakin erat untuk bekerja sama menghadapi berbagai tantangan global. Ya, demikian Insight kali ini. Saksikan kembali Insight besok bersama saya, Desi Anwar. Sampai jumpa dan bye-bye.